All right, welcome again to Social Distillation, the submarine still of the internet, where we attempt to drop the beat and pour white lightning straight onto your brain. What are we talking about today, Samo?
Well, you brought up an article about feminizing young boys and how it's affecting our our society now and culture and everything. And so we're going to talk about that. And you wanted me to bring up some numbers, and we got
Yep.
some interesting articles to go over. So hopefully this makes sense to you as we go through
hmm
the data here.
So this all started just because I came across this really good essay from Compact Magazine that was being spread around X over by a number of people that I follow. And it's called The Great Feminization. And I had posted it on Facebook and tagged you and said, "Hey, we should talk about this on Friday or on Wednesday." And the only other comment I got besides yours was a high school friend that was all butthurt about this because she works in a male-dominated industry, and yeah, there are problems, but to blame it all on feminism is just dumb. Okay.
Mhm.
Well, I'm pretty sure she didn't read the essay, but she did probably read. When I post articles, I usually post what I think is to me either the money quote or the more interesting quote or the thing that kind of encapsulates what's going on because I know people won't read it, and maybe the quote will say, what's this all about? And so the quote I pulled out from this that I put at the top when I posted it was, quote, all of these observations matched my observations of wokeness, but soon the happy thrill of discovering a new theory eventually gave way to a sinking feeling. If wokeness really is the result of the great feminization, then the eruption of insanity in 2020 was just a small taste of what the future holds. Imagine what will happen as the remaining men age out of these society shaping professions and the younger, more feminized generations take full control. Okay, well, you should ask, well, then what is great feminization in caps? What is that? Well, to go back to the article and read it, and right off the top on the first 4 or 5 paragraphs, she explains, oops, spoiler alert, the author explains what this is. And since I spoiled it, I might as well say, uh, the author is Helen Andrews, a woman who has children, sons, and that's one of her points that she makes in her conclusion about this is I'm worried about this because I have sons. What's the future they're going to grow up in? How are they going to be treated in the workforce? That kind of thing. And the other reason I liked this article and thought it was kind of right up your wheelhouse is right here at the top, as she says from the beginning. In 2019, I read an article about Larry Summers and Harvard, and that name rang a bell. And I said, "What is this?" Oh yeah. And then as she went, I remembered because this was a while ago. That changed the way I look at the world. The author, writing under the pseudonym Jay Stone, argued that the day Larry Summers resigned as president of Harvard University marked a turning point in our culture. The entire woke era could be extrapolated from that moment, from the details of how Summers was canceled, and most of all, who did the canceling: women. The basic facts of the Summers case were familiar to me. On January 14th, 2005, at a conference on, quote, diversifying the science and engineering workforce, end quote, Larry Summers gave a talk that was supposed to be off the record. In it, he said that the female underrepresentation in hard sciences was partly due to, quote, different availability of aptitude at the high end quote, as well as
Which let me
taste
translate that.
differences.
Which let me translate that
Yes.
different availability of amplitude at the high end. When we talk about tendencies, usually you get a bell curve for that. So that is a curve. If you're watching, I'm tracing it out with my fingers here. That is narrow or is shallow on the ends, and it grows bigger towards the middle, and the middle being the mean, and more people are around the middle than they are at the
Mhm.
ends. And so if we take something like sports ability, basketball ability, most people are going to be kind of lumped in the middle. But then as you get towards the ends, Then you get, especially the right side of the curve, you get your college basketball players, you get your NBA players, and they're going to be the exceptions. They're going to be so good that nobody in the middle can keep up with them. Uh, and what this means, different availability of amplitude at the high end, is that if there are differences in the curve between two groups, so in this case, male, female, if there are differences in the curve, the mean, which is the middle, might not be that far apart, but the difference at the ends becomes greater. And so we're talking Harvard, right? It is supposed to be the top echelon of schools for these fields. So you have to be the best of the best. So if the difference is greater at the ends, then there's going to be a bigger disparity between those two groups, and in this case, male, female. So because there's that huge difference, the qualifications to get there are much harder. And doesn't mean nobody can be there. It just means there's going to be
Yep.
less.
As
It's
a
just going to be a
negative
bit less.
example,
Yeah.
you see the same thing in prison
Oh yeah, yeah, exactly. Because
because
males
on the
and
tape,
females different in aggression, right? In violent
exactly.
tendency. Yeah.
All right. So then he goes on, as well as taste differences, which is important because I've mentioned before, there was a study done a long time ago where they followed a group of what we used to call, when we went to school, it was GT, gifted and talented, which was special class where you got to do special stuff if you had high IQ because they were trying to challenge you and whatever. And so they followed a group, a cohort of children in this program. So they were all high IQ. They all tested high in math and science, and they continued to do so um, through their school career. Except then, when they got into college, and especially when they went on into the workforce, they split greatly. Where something like 90% of the boys, when they became men, went into STEM, but only something like 50 or 60% of the girls did. And the researchers was like, "Oh my gosh, what's going on here?" Well, one of them went back and looked at the original data and said, interestingly, yes, they all tested high in math and science, but the girls also tested high in other stuff. The boys pretty much only tested high in math and science. Because, hey, cancel us now. Boys and girls are different.
Okay.
Anywho,
Okay.
not attributable to socialization was his point. Back to the article. Some female professors in attendance were offended and sent his remarks to a reporter in defiance of the off the record rule. The ensuing scandal led to a no confidence vote by the Harvard faculty and eventually Summers's resignation. The essay argued that it wasn't just that women had canceled the president of Harvard, it was that they canceled him in a very feminine way. Cancel us again, because we have said that before about this is how
I mean,
women
by
work versus how
definition,
men
it's
work.
gossip.
Yep.
Yeah.
What is it? You call it reputation damage?
Reputation damage. Yep.
Yeah. Back to the article. They made emotional appeals rather than logical arguments. Quote, when he started talking about innate differences in aptitude between men and women, I just couldn't breathe because this kind of bias makes me physically ill, end quote, said Nancy Hopkins, a biologist at MIT. Summers made a public statement clarifying his remarks, and then another, and then a third, with the apology more insistent each time. Experts chimed in to declare that everything Summers had said about sex differences was within the scientific mainstream. These rational appeals had no effect on the mob hysteria. This cancelization was feminine, the essay argued, because all cancelizations are feminine. Cancel culture is simply what women do whenever there are enough of them in a given organization or field. That is the great feminization thesis, which the author later elaborated upon at book length. Everything you think of as wokeness is simply an epiphenomenon of demographic feminization. All right. So we should throw the link to this essay in the
Notes.
description because I highly encourage everyone to go read it. I'm not going to keep reading from it because it is quite lengthy and we want to be as pithy as possible here.
Hmm.
But that is the crux of it. Um, and the reason I wanted to read out that long intro is because one of the places we started here, way back in our first episodes, was your kind of political awakening because you had been kind of apolitical because you were busy living life. You were busy working a job, raising a kid, maintaining a household, all the things of adulting.
Hmm.
And then all of a sudden you kind of realized the world has gone mad. How did this happen?
Hmm.
And as you started to look into it, you discovered CRT and the roots of critical theory.
Hmm.
And what surprised me is I knew kind of where the roots of critical theory and what is now DEI came from. I didn't realize how old it was. And that was something you showed because you actually dug into the academic literature of
Hmm.
what does it go back to like the 50s where
Well,
critical theory?
before that,
Oh,
but
before
yeah,
that? Because
yeah.
it was kind of part of it was a something of an offshoot of postmodernism.
Hmm.
And so it goes way back, but it stayed in academia for a long time.
Hmm.
Well, then eventually as it started to spread in academia, it reached a critical mass where enough normal people who had been educated in academia and then went out into the real world took that with them.
Hmm. Yeah, no, the 50s kind of blew it up. You got your the roots in like Marcuse and stuff, but that was because they came to the States to get away from fascist Nazi Germany. So they came over during the war and just kind of reset up camp for the Frankfurt School, and it just kind of, and then they kind of entrenched themselves, and then their teachings started to spread from there. But it goes way back. The ideals go back before the French Revolution,
Hmm.
because when we say the word left, the root of that is the the in the French Parliament, or whatever they called it, the French Parliament, the rad not the radicals, but the I say revolutionary because it ended up in a revolution, but the people, the progressives, sat on the left, and the entrenched, uh, what we would call conservative, but they were the keep it the way it is because we're the royalty. They sat on the right. So when we say left, that's the root of the word. So these ideas were pre-French Revolution.
Hmm. Yeah, exactly. And I have brought up that before the contrast between the American Revolution and the French Revolution and why theirs went so horribly off the rails.
Hmm. Well,
And
and
it
this there's a lesson in it too, because, and this is kind of the punchline I'll give you ahead of time, is what happened after the French Revolution? How long did that society last? Like what, 8 years?
Yeah, I think the Robespierre and that group, I think they ruled for about 8 years and it created such chaos that then you got Napoleon,
And you got Napoleon.
who was a decade, 12 years. So I can't remember how long he ruled, especially since he came back and all
Hmm.
that. And then once the coalition destroyed that, then it was right back to the monarchy.
Hmm. Well, and we even saw that in Russia, when the Soviet Union fell, and they just injected the progressive ideals. The whole place went into chaos,
Mhm.
and then you ended up with a strong arm leader taking over, and now we've got what we've got.
Yeah,
This is the big lesson in all. Yeah. Oh, some things sound great, but if your idea is wreck it all and we'll get utopia,
yeah,
no, you wreck it all and it stays wrecked until someone comes in and puts the iron fist down, and that's not always a good thing.
no.
In fact, it rarely is.
And the other lesson is I saw a clip of wasn't meaning to bring this up, but Brett Weinstein was uh, before some congressional committee talking about this and about how this is a coordinated effort to destroy all of these institutions that we rely upon um, as a civilized society and the undermining in the faith of these institutions. And I didn't watch the whole thing. I need to go back because I like listening to him because he's a very smart guy. Even when I disagree with him, I love the way he makes me think. And I've mentioned this before, but amusingly, because they are literally on opposite ends of the spectrum, communists, anarchists, right? The collective versus absolute individualism.
Hmm.
Well, except in the 1920s, the terrorists of that day were communist anarchists. What? That makes absolutely no sense. Well, no, it does when you recognize that what the reason they wanted anarchy, the reason they wanted chaos, is
Is so
so
they
they
could
could
replace it. Yeah.
replicate
Yeah.
the October Revolution of Russia. Is you had chaos, and then you had a group that was coalesced enough, organized enough, united enough to come in and take over, even though they were a minority. You know, same thing in Germany in the 30s. The 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 National Socialist Workers Party was a minority. They never got more than 30 something percent of the parliamentary vote, as I recall. But they were the most united, the most dedicated, the most focused. Everyone else was fractured and society was chaotic. They came in and they took control. And that is essentially what Weinstein was warning about is all of these institutions that we used to look to for apolitical or bipartisan guidance on, you know, civic and life things like the CDC, the FDA. We don't trust those people anymore, and that's a bad thing.
Hmm.
So back to
Well,
the
this is
oh, go ahead.
this is a good point because in class in a technically a health related field, there are grumblings in pretty much every lecture when data from the CDC comes up about we don't know if this information is going to be available anymore and da da da. This was so useful and now everything's being turned on its head. I'm like, yeah, it's your fault. It's your fault because you let it be taken over.
Hmm.
It became an activist organization. Yeah, no, I want this data too. I want all the good things it did. But because you let the bad people take over, we're losing it. We can't have
No.
nice things because you broke it.
So this gets back to the friend who shouted at us for this article because what you think of when you think of feminism probably is not what feminism is. You need to get into academia and see what they have been saying for decades to realize, oh no, this is what they wanted all along. This is what they've been saying all along. But they use this sleight of hand of equal pay for equal work, the right to vote. Oh, well, sure. Who disagrees with that? Nah, except that's not what they really mean when they say feminism, because they don't stop there.
Hmm.
They never have. And so, something Rush Limbaugh used to say, what he would always get in trouble for, and people would yell at him and saying he's being hyperbolic and he's a crazy person, he's making it up, is he would talk about how radical feminists think all sex is rape, all heterosexual penetrative sex, as they call it, PIV, penetrative intercourse. Okay. Now, I looked into this as well, and he would bring the receipts and talk about these crazy radical feminists, primarily Andrea Dworkin, who is one of the early, really radical, what we would now call third wave feminists. And she was an academic, and she wrote about these things in both academic journals and in mainstream published books. Now, technically, yes, as far as I can tell, the quote "all sex is rape" has also been attributed to Catherine McKinnon, who's another Canadian radical feminist. So far as I can tell, neither one of them said those words. Okay, but so as I was looking through this on this particular topic, I found this amusing article from someone on Medium defending Andrea Dworkin, and she herself is a feminist, but had heard all sex is rape and thought, well, that's over the top. And then she finally read the book and thought, oh, these reviewers, how awful for mischaracterizing what Andrea Dworkin said. Okay, well here's her defense of Andrea Dworkin. As the final date for my service overseas approached, I finished her polemic about sex in a male dominated society. I understood her position to be that the power dynamics in a patriarchal society creates a construct in which sexual relations between men and women are not egalitarian. It's about taking the power privilege into the bedroom. Okay, so she didn't say the words all sex is rape. She just said it's almost impossible for all sex to not be rape because of the power dynamics. And I've referenced this before because in the earlier 90s there was this huge sex scandal in the army where a command sergeant major, or maybe even the sergeant major of the army, which is the highest enlisted rank you can get, was having sex, supposedly consensual sex, with female recruits. But the allegation from leftist feminists was, no, it can't possibly be consensual because the power dynamic is so severe that if the highest enlisted rank says to a recruit private, hey, you want to have sex? She can't say no. Curiously, fast forward a few years, and those same feminists were saying, I would happily give Bill Clinton a blowjob for keeping abortion legal.
Mm.
The leader of the free world and an unpaid intern. What's the power difference there?
Yeah, yeah. Well, and we remember the case of Sabatini we brought up, the guy who was studying the mTOR pathways and probably on his way to curing cancer,
Mm,
or at least the groundwork that would lead to cures for cancer. And he dated his lab assistant for a while. And at the end of the day, even though it turned out that she was lying and all of these other things, the fact that they had been together, the power dynamic was the
mm.
excuse for blacklisting him from every lab in the country. So,
So here's another great quote, and this one comes from Snopes. Okay, this is Snopes defending Andrea Dworkin and saying, "Oh no, this is absolutely false. All sex is rape." So this is their defense, and in their defense and of Dworkin, this is an exact quote. When asked to explain her views on the topic, Dworkin replied, "Quote: Penetrative intercourse is by its nature violent." But I'm not saying that sex must be rape. Okay. What I think is that sex must not put women in a subordinate position. It must be reciprocal and not an act of aggression from a man looking only to satisfy himself. That's my point. It is really difficult to distinguish what she just said from all masculinity is toxic. There is a straight line there. All right. That kind of thinking is why her critics have said, you're saying all sex is rape. No, I'm not. And then you give this very nuanced gobbledygook word salad that basically says all sex is rape because it would be almost impossible to satisfy her criteria to make it not. In the same way that all masculinity is toxic, because if you ask them to define masculinity and define what positive masculinity would be, well, that's not masculinity at all.
mhm. Yeah, and this is where complex systems I mean, are very interesting because they actually allow for that interpretation, right?
Mm.
So, because the dynamics between male and female relationships is so complex, because we're human, because we're we're organisms, two things can be true. A boss could be telling his employee who has very few other options, you do this or you lose your job, which would be toxic. That would be coercion, which in my definition would be rape. Or she could be attracted to him because of his status, because of his competence, because of his ability, because of all of those things, and be really into him. So those two things could be true, and you can't tell the difference. Not from the
You know,
outside. You
I,
have to be in the relationship to know the difference. And then so the thing that can also be true is she is attracted to him. He is attracted to her. But then now she feels trapped as the relationship progresses that if I say no, I might lose my job and never voices it until something happens. And so he may not know. He may think she's still into him. Or even if she never was, but she never voiced, she never said no. But because she was afraid to say no, he may be oblivious to that. So there's a big difference between do this or else and, oh, she's into me, but she's really not.
you know what?
That's
That
what,
that leads me to this great one of my favorite modern philosophers who has a similar take on that, which I think would be a good uh, segue here into some other things in a break to this particular part of the topic. Uh,
okay, it's a gut field clip.
yes, yes,
Okay, hold on. Let me make sure I do this right this time.
yes. Very
Change
serious now.
sound. Okay.
Deep philosophical musings.
All right. So looks like it's Greg Gutfield. So this would be from Fox and Friends, I think, right?
No, his show, Gutfeld,
Okay.
his late night show.
Corner, a new study, my favorite kind, shows that the sound of someone's voice is the best indicator of whether they're attractive or not.
I have a good voice, which is why I was in radio. Now it's podcasting because everything sucks. But yeah, that's all I have. So yeah, I have this. No height. I have a little bit of hair, but this. I'm good over the phone, and now we have to show pictures. So I'm glad I met my wife before that. I read this article that said that if a woman has more than 3 beers, the Me Too movement, she can't consent to sex. And I was like, wow. Well, I'm a rapist. In fact, I've never had consensual sex. Just last night, I sexually assaulted my wife.
In romance.
That's Dave Landau. I've referenced it before. His show Normal World is the Normal World TV is the YouTube channel. Dare I ask Sam, have you ever had consensual? Actually, no. Hold on, Sam. You're the victim here.
uh,
You oh my gosh, all the times those horrible women have raped you.
I think for the most part, I have at least once in the relationship had completely sober sex. So
Okay.
for both parties, for both parties.
Well, so the serious point on spinning off of Dave Landau's comedic take there is the reason that's darkly humorous and not just absurdly humorous is because one of the things that I just brain farted on her name again. Andrews, right? Helen Andrews. One of the things she mentions in that essay is she brings up um the sexual harassment, sexual assault courts that sprung up in the Obama era as a spinoff from Title IX was their justification, and they were gross violations of due process. But her point was the right kind of focused on that gross violation of due process rather than looking at the real problem here is that the basis of them was again the assumption that all sex is rape, that as Dworkin herself said, penetrative intercourse is violent. So ipso facto, the burden of proof is on you, the man, that you didn't sexually assault this person who you don't get to meet, you don't get to know who it is, you don't get to face your accuser, all the due process things. Well, yeah, because you're clearly the perpetrator here unless you can prove to us otherwise.
Well, and that's exceptionally dangerous because as we saw with that article with the Harvard president, uh, reputation damage is scary, is very difficult to deal with. And Me Too took advantage of that. And it took advantage of uh, every relevant, every good case of it.
Yeah.
Not good case. Every case that the Weinstein example, like Harvey Weinstein. So it took advantage of those to create an environment where there was a weapon to be used. And that weapon was used very, very liberally. I've made the comment before, if reputation damage was treated the same as violence, the prisons would be 50-50 male female.
Mm-hmm.
Right now it's like 93-7. Okay, so but also an add to that, I brought up the studies before. I would have had it ready had I known it was going to go this way. But uh, when it comes to things surrounding reputation, women lie more
Mm.
than men. Because remember, it was, I think it was sexual partners where they were interviewed by somebody in person, by a researcher in person. Males were like 7 and females were like 2. And then when they were a blind questionnaire, it was males were 7, females were like 3 on average. And then when the females thought they were hooked up to a lie detector test, it was 7 and 7. So it was, and then they did the same thing. They replicated that with affairs. That was why we brought it up before, because
Oh yeah,
I
yeah.
brought that up to show that it's actually pretty much equal, men, women, and affairs. Now, I will say the caveat to that is mating is harder for men. So if it was easier for guys, it probably would
Oh
skew
yeah,
more male. If
yeah.
if if they had more attractiveness and could attract a partner while in a relationship, it probably would skew more male. But the point of that article was again, it was like a third. Then blind questionnaire it was about half, and then when it was hooked up to the pretend lie detector, it was the same number, 35%, I think, for both groups. So when it comes to things that surround reputation, you could probably pick any topic that makes you look bad, and women are more likely to lie about it. So now, fast forward, we get to the Me Too movement. Woman sleeps with male. So we'll assume that the case is there was no coercion, it was mutual, it was consensual, but then regrets it, and then is maybe confronted about it by friends or something along those lines. Oh no, 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 he forced me to do that. Or oh, I don't even remember. I was so drunk. I can't, I he must have taken advantage of me. All of these other stories that come out of it. So this is a problem. And when you give a group a weapon, I don't care what group it is, they're going to use it. And the bad actors are going to come out.
Exactly. All right. Well, how does this manifest in the real world?
Well, yeah, why is it important, right? Yeah.
And we're going to
Well, I mean, Me
transition.
Too was real important because it's a lot of guys. The part of the dating problems we have nowadays is the fact that Me Too existed. Guys are scared to death to approach a woman.
Exactly. I mean, for crying out loud, look at the Johnny Depp trial. Okay.
Mhm.
Now that is an extreme example because that lady was bat crap crazy, crap literally apparently. And the amount of damage because of his status as a celebrity, as an actor, and so the amount of money that it cost him because of the reputational damage. But look, just because you're not losing out on a tens of millions of dollars of contract, that doesn't mean you're not suffering.
Hmm.
You know, what? All right, if
Well, just
it,
having a bad reputation feels horrible.
yeah, yeah, there is the mental damage, and now that's something that is hard to quantify, but it's there.
People
And
off
and,
themselves over their reputation.
and I was about to say, and males already disproportionately commit suicide more than
Hmm.
women do. All
Yeah,
right.
and the flip side to it is the problem is the men that are scared to death to approach women are the good ones. The ones who have no problem approaching women are the ones who are going to be more likely to do the thing that is bad to begin with. And it's
Yep.
created a huge
Yep.
Pareto distribution in the dating market and encouraging psychopathic men to stay on Tinder.
So first, some stats here that she goes through, that Helen Andrews goes through in her article, which leads up to a link to another essay that I thought was really good and wanted to go over a little bit of. Um, to make her point, law schools became majority female in 2016. Law firm associates became majority female in 2023. This was all starkly concerning to me and my, a change of profession here. Today, women are 33% of judges in America.
Hmm.
Um, in numerous other professions, the New York Times staff became uh, majority female in 2018. Medical schools became majority female in 2019. 2019 also, women became a majority of the college educated workforce. Uh, Majority of college instructors in 2023. Not yet a majority of managers in America, but they might be soon, as they are now 46%. Okay. So keep all of those numbers in your mind. Um, and well, okay, and one more from a here's another set of numbers that matter to what we're to this topic as a whole and what we're about to shift to here, which is a survey found that 71% of men said protecting free speech was more important than
Hmm.
preserving a cohesive society, but 59% of women said the opposite. Okay, not that 50 that less women said protecting free speech was no, no, no. A majority of women, a significant majority, 59% said they would rather squash free speech and have a cohesive society than the reverse.
Yeah, and combine that with college surveys where it's somewhere similar numbers. About 70% of males say it is you should not cancel a speaker that's coming to the college
Mm,
because of their views, where the flip of that, it's even more than the 59. The inverse of that was women saying you should block a speaker from coming to your college if they have controversial views. And the problem is controversial views is up for interpretation right now. We
mhm.
saw with the Peterson stuff. It's like, what was Peterson talking about? Making your bed, petting cats. I mean, I'm being flippant there, but it was basically about, hey, start looking inward and getting your life in order. And it's kind of
Yeah.
like basic motivational speech stuff from like 10, 15 years ago, right?
And now it's radical. Yeah.
Yeah.
Speaking of radical, so this is a Catholic journal called The Lamp, and this is an article called "Against Human Resources," and also by Helen Andrews, which she linked to in her piece on feminization. And one of the reasons this is so great is not only does she give numbers, and you can see how this is kind of a beta version of her Great Feminization essay, because she's talking a lot about the same things, except she's specifically targeting HR here and what that has done to the workplace, and gives the stats on how HR departments are majority female. Okay. But one of the more interesting things into it is she gives the history of HR. So I'm going to read several paragraphs from this essay. Modern human resources originated in a single study known as the Hawthorne Experiment, published in 1933. In a way, the Hawthorne Experiment was a bookend to Frederick Winslow Taylor's more famous pig iron study at Bethlehem Steel in 1899. It was the origin of scientific management, which enjoyed such a vogue among progressives in the early part of the last century. The takeaway from Taylor's experiment was that there is one best way to perform any task, in this case, transporting pig iron from A to B. And an employer merely has to coax workers to conform to the objective standard. The takeaway from the Hawthorne experiment was that there is no one best way where human beings are concerned, and the real key to productivity lies in treating workers not as cogs, but as individuals. We'll pause there for a second because both of those sound logical. Both of those make sense. And, we have ranted before that people aren't widgets, and that's how certain philosophies treat them as you're just a widget. We're just going to plug you in here. So yeah, that makes a kind of sense. However, it also makes sense that if there is a simple task of moving a thing from A to B, there is probably one best way to do that.
Hmm.
Both can be true. And it's annoying that no, that was upended and it became an either or.
Hmm.
And because it became an either or, it became distorted and it turned into a mess. Well, now here's what the Hawthorne experiment was. The Hawthorne experiment revolved around 6 female workers from a Western electric factory near Chicago. They were plucked from the assembly line where they worked making telephone parts and put in a special room where experts could isolate various conditions and see their effects on productivity. The trials ran through more than a dozen iterations over several years and experimented with a wide array of motivators: free snacks, longer breaks, shorter hours, increased pay, productivity bonuses, softer lighting. To the experimenters' delight, each new change led to a perceptible increase in efficiency. Next, the experiments took away all the perks, and they added and reverted back to the working conditions at the start of the experiment. And to their surprise, productivity stayed the same. The increase was maintained. Then they put all the perks back, and productivity rose higher than ever. To make sense of this puzzling result, the Harvard professor in charge of the experiment concluded that it was not any particular enticement that motivated the women to work harder. It was the feeling of being special. Over the years, the experiment, the subjects had overcome over the years of the experiment, the subjects had overcome their initial reticence and become active participants, forming relationships with the experimenters and deriving pride from their involvement in something that had the potential to affect how their peers were treated. If bosses wanted to increase productivity, they should strive to replicate that feeling that management was genuinely interested in their employees' input. In retrospect, a few problems with this interpretation emerge. The first is that the subjects did not reflect the average American employee. They were young women, mostly teenage girls. The ages of the six were 18, 18, 19, 19, 24, and 28. Of course, flattery goes far with that demographic. We did not need a Harvard study to tell us that. What motivates a 19-year-old girl trying to earn pocket money or a dowry is not the same as what motivates a 30-something male breadwinner with 5 dependents. The idea that the secret to workplace harmony lay in being attuned to workers' feelings rather than in material perks like paying them more was eagerly embraced by employers. Gee, I wonder why.
That's the meme. I'm gonna have to look it up because it's the top and it uses the pawn shop guys, and on the top it says, employees, we need higher wages, more vacation, better conditions, and it says, best I can do, pizza party. And that's
Exactly.
the trope, it's the pizza party.
And where does that come from? Who throws the pizza party?
HR.
Exactly. And
Yeah.
so and then Andrews goes through starting through the 30s and 40s of where this took off. And at first it was slow, much like with critical theory, much like with the feminizing of academia. It started off slow, but eventually it begins to pick up speed and then it reaches a critical mass.
Well,
And
well, it became a self-perpetuating machine too, because HR
yes,
became responsible for hiring and firing as well.
exactly.
And when you're responsible for hiring and firing, that's where the power comes in. So
Exactly.
so you're throwing trinkets out there to make everybody happy, but nobody can say anything because they'll get fired.
And and,
So we
and
talk about
this
power dynamics, right?
this connects to the disconnect of what feminism is versus what people think it is. Because when you think human resources, what most people probably think is, well, yeah, you've got to have somebody to deal with all of the non-business side of business. Meaning, okay, so my professor in one of my classes talks about this because she used to be a corporate lawyer. She used
Mhm.
to work in the legal department of a large corporation. And the way they treat you is different from the way they treat other departments because you're a net loss.
Mhm.
You are not directly related to the product that they are selling, the product or service that actually makes the company money. You are a loss,
Mhm.
but you are deemed necessary because you need a legal department to protect yourself, to make sure that, you know, what you're doing conforms to the law, to deal with any legal issues that arise if you're getting sued or if you need to sue someone. Well, same thing with HR. You have all these non-business sides of business. You've got, benefits packages, you've got, pay. There may be issues that arise with that. There may be conflicts that arise between workers or between workers and management.
Mhm.
And you need people to deal with that part so that you can focus on the product or service you're actually selling that's actually making you money.
Mhm.
But to your point, where that metastasized into something toxic is when you gave this department power over
The productive part
the
of the
productive part. So they
yeah.
are no longer just dealing with all this non-business stuff so that the producers can focus on producing. No, they're actually in charge of the producers now.
Yeah, I've seen it. I've seen it. It happens a lot in some of these smaller, but big enough to be a productive company, but small enough that they're not like Amazon or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm the health professional that trains health professionals because that's the reputation I've built. So I have a lot of clients that work in home health, that work in physical therapy in the home or occupational therapy in the home, and they all worked for one company at the time I got them. And that company got bigger. It used to be just the local area. And then it was just the local area and the next area. And as they started getting bigger, they started hiring more HR, administrative jobs. And then that administrative section started growing because HR started hiring HR. And it kept growing and growing because they wanted to make their this is part of the thing. They want to make their job easier, so they hire other people that do their job so that it spreads the work around. And so as that kept growing, they weren't hiring more therapists and PTAs and stuff because the budget was all going to new HR. And then all of a sudden that got so big and well, HR's got to justify their existence. So they kept complicating the system over and over and over and over again and creating systems for the PTs and PTAs that they had to do and requirements and oh, you have to sign into this system and log this way and da 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 da. Well, you drive from place to place. Traffic exists. This stuff exists. Clients, you're scheduling with people every week trying to get your schedule together and they're like, oh, well, now you need 32 visits a week instead of 30. And it's, well, if you have an hour drive between one and the other and you only get paid for the visit, well, you just cut that person's pay in half, right? So eventually they all got disgruntled and they left the company because they were getting paid less for more work because HR blew up. And then this same company, all of a sudden, it was only HR. All the
So
PTs
that
and PTAs were gone, and they're like, why are we dead? It's like the meme with the guy shooting himself, and he's like, why does this always happen? They all went to a different company, smaller company. Exactly the same thing happened because they came in, they did a great job, it expanded, 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 and then all of a sudden it just kept growing. The tumor. HR is like the tumor that keeps growing. Tumor are regular cells until they're not, and they grow uncontrollably. HR is a regular part of business until it grows uncontrollably. And then they
that
put their mitts in it and
Yep. And this is a point that Andrews makes in that Lamp magazine article, which is, I'm going to quote here briefly, the wedge that HR used to shove its way into American workplace was anti-discrimination law, specifically the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which she talks about. I'm going to skip down a little bit. In retrospect, it is odd that personnel departments were the site of growth in response to anti-discrimination law. If you want to know whether your business is in compliance with the law, typically you ask a lawyer. But as the Harvard sociologist Frank Dobbin explains, lawyers were, quote, unwilling to recommend compliance strategies not yet vetted by judges. Professional norms directed them to advise clients about black letter law and not to speculate wildly about what the courts might or might not approve, end quote. Personnel departments have no such inhibitions. Filled the vacuum. All right. So then she goes on not only to talk about the legal part, but then also along the same lines, HR departments started recommending productivity strategies that were theory. Well, they weren't even theory, they were hypothesis.
mhm.
Let's use the right term here. They presented them as theory, but really they were hypothesis. They were things that sounded reasonable of we should do this because either this will keep us in compliance with anti-discrimination laws and or it will also increase productivity. This will make our workers happier. And yet, a lot of times, most of the times, when those hypotheses were actually challenged, whether challenged in court because of, from the anti-discrimination side or challenged through study to see, will this actually increase productivity? An academic study was done and it was found, no, the courts don't think this is discriminatory. We don't have to do this. And or, oh, here are 5 studies which show this particular strategy doesn't actually increase or significantly increase productivity. And yet it continued
Mhm.
because, as you pointed out, HR had become its own entity. They had become the bosses.
Well, it's the same complaint about the government right now. It's the bureaucracy. That's exactly what they call the deep state. It is
Yes.
that big conglomerate of things. It's not this criminal organization. Well, there might be some in there, but it's not this criminal organization that is out to destroy America. No, it is this giant thing that grew and can't be gotten rid of. Like it's stage 4 cancer. You can't just cut it out, and you can't fire the people individually. So that's the whole point of one of the things about this shutdown is they're they're basically not paying people, so they quit. I mean, that's one of the big things going on right now. The IRS just
Yeah.
stopped paying half their employees. So hopefully they just quit because you can't fire individual people. Now you can
Yeah.
fire entire blocks of people, but if you were looking at, so everybody pretend you're an employer and you've got 100 employees and and five of them are causing problems. Wouldn't you love the ability to fire those five people? But no, you have a system where the law says you can't fire those five people causing problems. You have to just fire 50% of your employees randomly. If it's completely random, there is a probability that you end up with 50 employees and those five are still there.
Hmm.
So that's the problem. The joke is you can't fire the government workers. That's why they're so bad at their jobs. But that's true.
Well, see, that's why I think the idea that it's cancer is a bad analogy. What it is it's one of my favorite movies, John Carpenter's The Thing,
Mm,
because it hides among you, but it's actually trying to destroy you. And if you try and fight back against it, it will fight back. You see this with all of the anonymous sources leaking to the press about how Secretary of War Hegseth has lost us. And who has he lost? Well, he's lost the people who are not, as he puts it, directly aiding the war fighter. So no more DEI departments, no more special, no more Pride Month crap. No, we are here to kill people and break things or support the people who are killing people and breaking things.
hmm
And like every other department of the government, the Department of Defense became bloated with bureaucracy that had nothing to do, not only nothing to do with its mission, but actually contradicted and detracted from its stated mission. And those people are fighting back and trying to create noise to inhibit the reforms that Hegseth is trying to implement.
hmm
And it, it you see this all over, and it's so infuriating. But I didn't mean to bring up Weinstein, and yet it connects so perfectly because we should be living in a golden era. I've kind of ranted about this before, is we've all got a supercomputer in our pocket,
hmm
literally. The thing I am holding here, this little phone, this little rectangle that fits easily into my pocket is orders of magnitude greater than the first desktop computer I ever had, which for those of you who don't remember, go find yourself the sound of dial-up internet.
Yeah.
And then how slow it was, but how awesome it seemed. And yet it is nothing compared to the processing power, the storage capacity, and the connective speed I have in my freaking pocket.
hmm
So this should be a golden age. And yet, to Weinstein's point,
Well, I'm
we
gonna
can't
even
trust anybody. Who do
yeah,
you
I'm gonna even
trust?
go down the hierarchy of needs. They say, oh, the housing crisis. What we call a housing crisis, except for the homeless, which is majority people with mental health issues,
Yep.
except for those individuals, everybody's got a roof over their head. Even if it sucks, even if your rent's high, even if it's not the greatest, you have a roof over your head. Uh, Grocery store exists. Yeah, even if you're freaking poor, rice and beans is 70 cents a pound dry, which means four times that cooked. Okay. Uh,
Also means you don't have to worry about spoilage.
yeah. Everybody's got running water. We have running water. Uh, we're basically we enough clothes to wear. So unless you're in that homeless population, which is a certain percentage, and it does exist, the poorest of the poor is still has all their needs met. So yeah, we are in a golden age, and we have been for quite some time. Can it get better? Yeah, but at the same time, he's right.
And this is where this kind of disconnect comes from. And it was a couple months back, I brought up an essay and we went over called "Red Pills Without Roots," which was specifically talking about, which connects to the Great Feminization, because what that article was focused on was the shift away from the left by young men and boys, because they just instinctively, biologically, dare I say, feel that something is not right. But because we have so distorted our education system, but both the uh, technical education system of the school system, but also the supplemental education system, which is everything else, which is our parents and our churches. And for Little League Baseball, used to be supplemental education. We've both ranted about that, about how no, the focus of Little League shouldn't be to make you throw faster and hit better. It should be learning how to be a team player,
Hmm.
learning how to deal with failure and keep going. That used to be a life lesson. Okay. And we have ruined that, so that you have all these young men and boys who instinctively feel something's not right, but they don't know what it is. They don't know why. They can't put their finger on it. And part of it is because it is, to use the word of the left, it is systemic. This is what Weinstein was talking. Weinstein went down a long list of, here are all the things that are broken, that we
Hmm.
we can't trust, all the institutions that we don't trust anymore, the media, academia, et cetera, and so forth.
Well, you brought up the Frankfurt School back in the 50s and even further back than that. Uh, we look at things like the Fed. What was that, the 1910s when the Fed became a thing under
Yeah, it was
Wilson?
Woodrow Wilson. I want to say it
Yeah.
was 1913.
That was kind of in the States was kind of the start of it for us. That was one of the big steps in the long march through the institutions, which is what they call it. So they were already coming into the universities and into the bureaucracy at that point. And you look at universities, you look at Disney. Disney's a great example. Big businesses like that, where basically their product sucks now. It's broken. It's not what it used to be. That's the whole point of that movement you talked about earlier, is to integrate into institutions, then break them, and then say, see, the system is broken. We must tear it down. And that's now to get to the political angle on how HR is being used. Yeah, we talked about the natural progression of it, but on the political side, people who are college educated are being indoctrinated, right? And they're going into HR because that's what you do with a useless degree, is you go into HR because the requirement for the job is degree because it shows you can do your homework. That's basically what
Yeah.
the requirement to be in HR. And now we have activists in there actively breaking systems because they have the power to do so. And then saying, see, it was bad from the beginning. It was like, no, you broke it.
So let's finish up here,
Yeah. Yeah.
because this tie connect back to where we started with the Great Feminization. And oh, you think this is just hyperbole? Okay. The other place you go other than HR, if you have a useless degree where you've been indoctrinated in academia, is the school system.
Hmm.
The overwhelming majority of teachers and administrators in elementary, middle, and high school are women who, and they were indoc
95%, is it? No, that might be
so
kindergarten specifically, but it's something like
it's
that.
high.
Yeah.
It's a lot. The overwhelming majority. Let's and they are overwhelmingly taught by education departments that are overwhelmingly female. And how
Not
does
only
that?
that, impressionable female. That
Yes.
because uh, I don't know the exact numbers off the top of my head, but when tested IQ wise, departments of education score lower than every other department in universities. And departments of education are your future teachers. So the dumbest people to go through college are the people teaching your children.
And it again, let's get canceled. Biology matters. If you have a more feminine mind, you are less likely to buck the system. You are less
Mhm.
likely to be a contrarian.
Well,
You are going
and
to
not
go
I'm
along
not,
to get along.
it's more than that. We talked about pendulum swings last time. Uh, it's not only are you less likely to buck the system, you're more likely to support a system that makes you feel safe.
That yeah, that's a better point. All right, so how does this impact boys? Well, you brought up some interesting statistics a few weeks ago that I don't know if I meant to bring up on while we were recording, and I don't know that we did about ADHD diagnosis
Hmm.
in boys. And this is something uh men have been complaining about for a long time about the feminization of our school system and the way it works, the way we have, you know, PE is now a joke. Recess may or may not even happen. Um, Shop classes are going away. Uh, these things that boys need as outlets for their energy so that it doesn't become aggression. Back to where we referenced, prisons earlier. So what were these statistics on ADHD and boys?
Uh, so it was actually on the persistence of ADHD into
Yes.
adulthood. So, and this is complicated. This is because ADHD it stands for attention deficit slash hyperactivity disorder. And so 2 to 1 boys are diagnosed with ADHD at a young age compared to girls. But as you go into adulthood, the persistence rate is half for males. So it's around 60 something percent for females. I just had the number in front of me. 60% on the dot for females, and after an 11-year follow-up, and 30% for boys. So basically, that kind of levels the playing field. There's still more males that have ADHD, but it's very close to being 50-50 as adults. Now, here's the complicated part. So, attention deficit slash hyperactivity disorder, more males skew to the hyperactivity. And one of the theories on this, the hypotheses on this is that the attention deficit part is persistent. And as you grow up, the hyperactivity reduces. Now, one of my thoughts on that with males versus females is young boys are hyperactive and they tend to be all over the place. And our school system is set up to be sit down, shut up, do your homework, and listen in class, and play nice and don't do this and don't do that. And we like to wrestle around, but that's not playing nice. That's it, and we brought it up before, pull the girl's hair, and it was like I was trying to flirt. It's as an adult, you have more avenues of outlet. Like I went down the list, and on the attention deficit side, I've got like 7 of the 9 things checked on the box. But I mean, nobody can diagnose themselves. But if I was to check those boxes, and I'm thinking back as a kid, when I get my conduct reports, I'm not thinking of what I thought of myself. I'm thinking about what I brought home on my conduct
Mhm.
report. You know, yeah, about 7 of the boxes, and maybe about 5 now. So 5 of the 7 is persistent. On the hyperactivity part, as a child, I probably hit like 4, which is all you needed. But I have 0 of those now. But also, I found a way to be the way I am with still all those boxes checked as an entrepreneur. Like you won't see me in an assembly line. We worked at Mercruiser for
Oh
what
gosh.
all of
Oh,
3 weeks,
less than that, I think. It
putting
was
the
a week
same
or two.
putting the
They're like,
same 4
God, we got to
stickers
get
on
out of here.
on
Yeah.
that part and putting it down. And yeah, that was the most miserable 3 weeks of employment I've ever had. And
McDonald's was better than that because at least you had different orders coming in. It was basically the same, but there was enough variety for you to not go insane.
yeah. Well, and if even if you're in that environment like a McDonald's where it's dynamic but it is kind of repetitive, if you have that entrepreneurial spirit, you're going to be a manager soon. If you've got any competence and that spirit, you're going to be a manager. And now you're dealing with lots of people, and that's always interesting. So, but yeah, it's so that this is a very again a complex system. The hyperactivity you kind of grow out of, but also after school, those boys probably went into industries that allowed them to not be called hyperactive.
And that would be an interesting follow-up to that study that what makes me curious. I wonder if there is a study specifically looking at
Mm-mm.
um, males who go into blue collar or go into the trades.
They don't want to. No, I'm saying that's the thing about universities. They control all the studies.
That's a good point.
There are NGOs that do study and independent labs, but 95, 96% of all the
Yeah.
studies we read are a university. I've brought forth stuff that I'm like, hey, maybe I could study this or something because I still have to have a thesis by the time, and all the teachers are like, no, 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 and it's like, well, you just don't like the idea. It doesn't mean it's not good,
And it
and
doesn't mean I can't do good work with it.
hmm
Doesn't mean it's not worth exploring. And I think this is, I mentioned the numbers that Andrews gave the numbers for uh the majority of women being now in college educated in the workforce. And I think, there's two parts to that. One is the feminization. They are appealing to girls and they are pushing them forward, especially when it comes to STEM and things like that. But also the structure of it is antithetical to what boys inherently want. So you can see why there is now a shift away from college and into trades. You know, I've mentioned my son before. Is his junior year, he did shop. I was surprised they had shop class here in the suburbs, and it was actually a really good one. And one of the things they did was welding. I was initially annoyed of I have to buy you welding gloves. Those are
hmm
expensive. All right, fine. But he liked it, and he said, "Wait a minute, welders make how much, and they don't have to go
oh
into
yeah,
student debt to do it.
one of my
I think I'll do
brother-in-law,
that."
yeah, one of my brother-in-laws is a welder, and they do well for themselves.
And
They're,
that was his post high school plan. But he needed one more math course. And his senior year, he said, "Oh, accounting, that'll be helpful. That'll help me in life." And as he did it, he found that for him, it was incredibly easy. And he said, "Wait a minute, accountants make how much? And they get to work in air conditioning? Yeah, I think I'll do that instead of welding."
well, he can have his cake and eat it too. He can weld on the side as a hobby.
He does a little bit of it
Yeah.
with my
Just
brother-in-law.
make
And
stuff and
yeah,
sell it at a freaking craft show.
he messes around with some metalworking just to help my
Mhm.
dad, and my brother-in-law does a bunch. So
I've got
yeah,
two
the
pieces of
point.
yard art from my sister's husband, a different brother-in-law,
Mhm.
uh, and he likes to make quirky things from old pieces of stuff. And so I've got two pieces of yard art that one looks like a bird and it's made out of a rake and a shovel and all this stuff, and one is a flower. My wife hates them, but I love them.
So I want to stick with this topic next, spin off of this topic, let me say, next time, because I want to talk about my great grandma who taught in a one-room schoolhouse in rural Oklahoma. Um, and how that was so different than the way we teach now and what the results were. Because one of the things that drives me insane is when I see on Facebook or on X when people talk about we should teach, you know, accounting and how to change your oil and all these life skills in school. You know who didn't teach that? Our parents and great grandparents and grandparents. You know who was able to do all that? Our parents and grandparents and great grandparents.
hmm
Why? Because they were taught how to think, not what to think, which is the
hmm
other big part of the problem with the and why we call it indoctrination, not teaching, is because you are not just being taught within a rigid system, you are being taught within a rigid intellectual system.
hmm Yeah, that's a good place to close it. I'm trying to think if I have any final thoughts. I don't think so. Yeah, because we're going to continue this conversation anyways. But yeah, just kind of keep your mind on how the way the because to bring it back to the beginning, it HR and administrative positions, bureaucracies allowed for that influx of feminizing industries because it's about control, right? The maternal instinct, that's why I hate when people call a controlling society a patriarchal. The maternal instinct is to don't do that. Don't put that rock in your mouth. Don't put that fork in the in the outlet. You know, you're taking the maternal instinct is to take care of an infant who is not smart enough at that point to do things on their own. The paternal instinct is to grow something, it's to build something. And so when that shift in mindset came in, we saw it when I worked at USAA. It was that they had that moment in time where it was you need to do this by this procedure, by this procedure, by this procedure, and it was in that influx of making everything equitable in the management positions and in the in again overloaded HR, and they lost a lot of business because people would call in and they'd just be like, quit doing this. Just do the thing I called for. But we had all these procedures we had to go through because of HR and management. So it is that protective, controlling instinct, and combined with what you brought up with that Hawthorne study, which is, oh, this is how what makes me feel good. So it's going to work on this industry. And those two things combined. Now, I thought we were going to go a different direction because I read that whole article you sent me. So we might go into this next time. So just to tease, there is a movement, and again, it started in academia. I'm in it now. I hear it every time I go to class and read a paper or whatever, that actually it would be good if boys were more like girls. And the
Hmm.
education department is a big one that they're taught that to feminize men and combine that with environmental factors, probably microplastics and pheromone loss of pheromones because of the heightened use of birth control, all kinds of environmental factors. Testosterone is dropping in males. So it's not just how they're taught, it's actually physiological that we are losing that. And there is the idea out there that if boys were girls, everything would be better. And in
Yep.
some circles, it's gone so far that one of the reasons they celebrate trans women is because they're so feminine, they tried to become a woman.
That's a good point. Yeah.
And so that I thought that was the direction we were going to go. So I had those articles up, but I'll just keep them for next time. Some of it's on purpose, some of it is just the cross-sex mind reading problem. And now that everything is so integrated, that's going to become more of a problem. We talked about the workforce, how much of the conflict when more women went into the workplace after the good feminist movements way back, how much of the conflict was crappy men being misogynistic, which existed. Again, complex. It's hard to parse this out. And how much of it was they did the women that went in there that aren't hierarchical, aren't competitive, went into a competitive environment and said, I don't like this.
Hmm.
Then they must be being mean to me because I'm a girl. And it's like, no, they're being mean to you because they're mean to everybody that's their competition in this workplace. And so that's how we can't parse that out because nobody actually said, oh, wait, there is a difference between how this person psychologically interacts versus this person psychologically interacting. They just said, oh, everybody can just go in and do the same thing. And then back to HR, they got the power and they said, well, all we have to do is just change the workplace. No longer is it this competitive male environment. Now it's you have this, you do this, you do this, you do this, you do this. You say anything, you're fired.
Yep.
Yeah.
All right.
Oh,
Well, that's what we'll rant about next time. And uh, Wheel of Time. We wanted to talk about Matt and going with the flow, which will hopefully help with all of the
yeah, this
ick
is
that we're talking about.
gonna be a good vibes
Of
conversation the next time.
Yeah, good
Yeah.
vibes and how you deal with all this nonsense of real life that wants to beat you down. And well, you got to figure out how to go with the flow, which
Yeah.
easier said than done, but we'll talk about some examples.
All right. Well, that's all for today, and we'll see you next time.